I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. About a dozen classified records were found in the Indiana home of former Vice President Mike Pence. We are learning more about how the documents apparently wound up in Mike Pence's home in an unsecured area in his Indiana home. Apparently, these documents were first sent from the vice presidential residence to a temporary home that former Vice President Mike Pence was staying in Virginia, and then shipped to his home in Indiana. Mike Pence then reported this to the National Archives, who reported it to the Department of Justice. And on Tuesday, Mike Pence also reported this to the relevant congressional committees as well. And what should be noted is that former Vice President Mike Pence, during an interview that he gave with ABC on November 14th, 2022, about whether or not he took classified records with him, whether or not classified records were at his home in Indiana, told ABC absolutely not. There were no records in his home. Here, play this clip of former Vice President Mike Pence. Play the clip.
Did you take any classified documents with you from the White House?
I did not.
Do you see any reason for anyone to take classified documents with them leaving the White House?
Well, there'd be no reason to have classified documents, particularly if they were in an unprotected area.
Well, there were classified documents, and they were in, as you report, an unprotected area.
So currently what we are learning is that the FBI and the Justice Department's National Security Division is investigating Mike Pence. A special counsel has not yet been appointed. We will see if a special counsel needs to be appointed. Now, the reason that you would hire a special counsel in a specific circumstance is ultimately if there is a potential conflict within the Department of Justice. So ultimately, when Donald Trump announced that he was running for the presidency, at that point, that's why only within a day or two after that announcement, a special counsel, Jack Smith, was appointed there. And the reason a special counsel was appointed with respect to classified records found at President Biden's office in Delaware, or his garage in Delaware, and his office in the University of Pennsylvania, was also because potential conflicts of interest between the Department of Justice, where the Attorney General and others at the top are appointed by President Biden, and potential conflicts of interest with President Biden. Now, former Vice President Pence's lawyer, Greg Jacobs, who has also worked for Vice President Pence when he was vice president, sent a letter to the National Archives and Records Administration, and this is what stated in the letter. Let's pull up this letter sent by Greg Jacob on behalf of former Vice President Pence. It says, "Dear Ms. McClure, as Vice President Mike Pence's designated representative to the National Archives, I write to request your assistance with collecting and transferring to the custody of the National Archives an additional set of vice presidential records. The additional records appear to be a small number of documents bearing classified markings that were inadvertently boxed and transported to the personal home of the former vice president at the end of the last administration. Vice President Pence was unaware of the existence of sensified or classified documents at his personal residence. Vice President Pence understands the high importance of protecting sensitive and classified information and stands ready and willing to cooperate fully with the National Archives in any appropriate inquiry. Following press reports of classified documents at the personal home of President Biden, out of an abundance of caution on Monday, January 16th, Vice President Pence engaged outside counsel with experience in handling classified documents to review records stored in his personal home. Counsel identified a small number of documents that could potentially contain sensitive or classified information interspersed throughout the records. Vice President Pence's counsel, however, is unable to provide an exact description of the folders or briefing materials that may contain sensitive or classified information because counsel did not review the contents of the documents once an indicator of potential classification was identified. Vice President Pence immediately secured those documents in a locked safe pending further direction on the proper handling from the National Archives. Vice President Pence has directed his representatives to work with the National Archives to ensure their prompt and secure return. Vice President Pence appreciates the good work of the staff at the National Archives and trusts they will provide proper counsel in response to the letter. Signed, Greg Jacob. And the lawyer who former Vice President Pence engaged to conduct this search was a lawyer by the name of Matt Morgan. And Matt Morgan was retained by Pence to engage in the search and ultimately found and located these dozen or so classified records at Vice President Pence's home. Here's an important point I want to make, though. Both the classified documents at President Biden's home in Delaware and his office at the University of Pennsylvania, at the office that he maintained there, and these records that are in former Vice President Pence's home in Indiana, the response by Biden and Pence, frankly, is the appropriate response. It shows that there isn't criminal intent. There's absolute cooperation. I mean, just look what happened on Friday, where President Biden invited the Department of Justice, as part of his unfettered cooperation, to go in and conduct a search of his home, and gave full access without the need for search warrants, without the need for subpoenas, and has directed his lawyers to cooperate tirelessly with the Department of Justice at all, and the National Archives at every step of the way. And by the way, with respect to President Biden, only a very small number of documents is what we're talking about. Same thing with former Vice President Pence. We're talking about a small number of classified records. Both former vice presidents and both Pence and Biden both took the same approach, that they have directed representatives to work cooperatively with the National Archives to ensure their prompt and secure return, because there's no intent to actually steal these records which belong to the government. You can't steal records, conceal, obstruct, destroy, lie, over and over again. So you compare this conduct, and I think it's fair to say that with respect to Pence and with respect to Biden, if we're being objective here, and I think they would admit to this, that it's certainly sloppy that they had these classified records that were in their possession at their home. Sloppy. But there is a big difference between sloppy and potentially careless and very criminal conduct. And so that's where you compare their conduct with the conduct of Donald Trump. Now, after Donald Trump left the White House in January of 2021, these documents weren't mistakenly transferred to Mar-a-Lago, the weird resort where Donald Trump lives in Palm Beach County in Florida. Donald Trump intentionally stole the documents because he wanted them for himself. He believed that it's not the government. He believed criminally that he was the one who should keep these documents and that they belonged to him, and that he viewed himself not as a steward of our Constitution, but he viewed himself as like an emperor, a king, an authoritarian leader. Mine, 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 mine. So he stole not a few documents, but tens and thousands of documents, tens of thousands of documents and records, and hundreds of classified records, including top secret, sensitive, compartmented information that's so sensitive they have to be viewed in sensitive, compartmented information facilities, SCIFs. And Donald Trump specifically took documents in a very transactional way. He took documents about Iranian missile systems and the military weapon systems of China, intentionally stealing these records. We believe he also stole records about other nuclear systems of foreign countries as well. And Donald Trump, when he knew he had these records, and two, he intended to conceal these records, because when the National Archives asked for them back and said, look, we have records that you took these. Can you turn them over? What took place was about 18 months before a search warrant was ultimately executed in early August of 2022 of consistent lie after lie, obstruction, concealment. That's ultimately what Donald Trump is being criminally investigated for. Frankly, not for being sloppy, not for being careless, not because he had the records, but because when the National Archives said, hey, you need to return these, we've identified him, he obstructed their processes. He obstructed the Department of Justice's processes, and he concealed and hid and lied about these documents each and every step of the way. And He begins lying February, March, April of 2021, and the National Archives is being very patient with him. And they're saying, look, we know you have these documents. Can you return them? Donald Trump's directing his lawyers to lie to them and say, we don't have documents. We don't have the records. Finally, Donald Trump agrees, okay, I'm going to turn over some portion. I'm going to cherry pick some documents to turn over to the National Archives. In January of 2022, Trump turns over about, some boxes that are filled with these records. And the National Archives says, look, it looks like you're hiding classified records inside newspaper clippings and newspaper articles. So finally, the National Archives goes, okay, you're not being cooperative. We have to turn this over to the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice says, hey, you need to turn over the records. And Trump says no. In fact, what Trump basically says is, one, I don't have the records, but even if I had the records, I want you to give me records about Hillary Clinton in exchange for the records that I have. And the Department of Justice says, this isn't a hostage negotiation. Turn over the records. And so after Donald Trump continues to lie, the Department of Justice has to, because he's not turning over the records. He's not being cooperative. He's doing the exact opposite of what President Biden and Vice President Pence did here. They had to issue a subpoena. So a subpoena issues from a grand jury in Washington, D.C. And then Trump is late on the subpoena. He makes no objections to the subpoena, but he has a lawyer, Christina Bobb, who claims to be a custodian of records, meet with the top counterintelligence official at the Department of Justice on June 3rd with a red weld folder that's sealed with lots of classified records in it, hundreds or over 100. And they turn it over to the Department of Justice and with a declaration saying a diligent search has been conducted, and based on all the information provided to me, Christina Bobb, here are all the remaining records. Again, that was a false declaration that was submitted to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has informants inside Mar-a-Lago. They're aware that the other classified records are still there. They have a list of classified records that are missing. So finally, after all this process, after all of the lies, almost 2 years of lies, a search warrant has to be executed because there's no other way to get the records back. And it turns out that there's still 11,000 other government records that Trump stole, including, again, over 100 additional classified records that Trump intentionally stole. So there's intent, there's obstruction, there's concealment. And if you go look back at the search warrant that the Department of Justice ultimately submitted to the court that was signed by a magistrate judge in August of 2022, there's no crimes that Donald Trump is being accused of for the classification status of the documents. And he's not even being, investigated simply for the existence of the documents. What he's being investigated for is the concealment, the obstruction, the destruction, and mutilation of records. That's the criminal conduct at issue. So when you're doing a comparison, and if people are ever asking you, oh, we hear about Pence and we hear about Biden and we hear about Trump, what's going on here? Well, the difference is Trump's intent. The difference is the quantity. I mean, Trump took thousands of records and hundreds of classified records. And you have in Pence and Biden, apparently, a great deal of cooperation, a recognition that they can't steal the records, returning the records to the National Archives and going through that process, and Trump's malicious intent, destruction, and concealment. And those are the crimes that Trump is being investigated for. That's the difference here, folks. And it's important that we all understand that. So we'll keep you updated as we learn more about these classified records that were found in Pence's home in Indiana. We'll let you know if there's any developments there, and just stay tuned to the MeidasTouch network, and we'll keep you updated with more breaking news. Hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your incredible support. Hit subscribe now, and also check us out, please, at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. patreon.com/MeidasTouch. You'll love the content we have at Patreon, but most importantly, it helps grow this independent media platform. So check it out, folks. Patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
Our blue wall stopped the red wave and election deniers got denied election. That's why we're celebrating with the new Democracy Prevails team. We've got lots of work to do, but we should all be proud that when democracy was tested, democracy prevailed. You've earned this. Don't wait. Get yours right now at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.